Hi everybody, it is Friday, March 12th and time for another FLC Youth devotion during our Lenten series. Today's devotion is entitled Consider the Lilies. And the first thing I'm going to do is read a Bible passage from the book of Luke, chapter 12, verses 13 through 34. And I'm reading today from the Message, which is a more contemporary version of the Bible. I just thought that it was a little bit easier to understand in this version. It's entitled The Story of the Greedy Farmer. Someone out of the crowd said, "Teacher, order my brother to give me a fair share of the family inheritance." He replied, "Mister, what makes you think it's any of my business to be a judge or a mediator for you?" Speaking to the people, Jesus went on, "Take care, protect yourself against the least bit of greed. Life is not defined by what you have, even when you have a lot." Then he told them this story. The farm of a certain rich man produced a terrific crop. He talked to himself, "What can I do? My barn isn't big enough for this harvest." And then he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And then I'll gather in all my grain and all my goods, and I'll say to myself, 'Self, you've done well. You've got it made, and you can now retire. Take it easy. Have the time of your life.' Just then God showed up and said, 'Fool, tonight you die, and your barn full of goods? What good is it? Who gets it?' That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God." He continued this subject with his disciples. "Don't fuss about what's on the table at mealtime, or if the clothes in your closet are in fashion. There is far more to your inner life than the food you put in your stomach. More to your outer appearance than the clothes you hang on your body. Look at the ravens, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, carefree in the care of God, and you count far more. Has anyone, by fussing before the mirror, ever gotten taller by so much as an inch? If fussing can't even do that, why fuss at all? Walk into the fields and look at the wildflowers. They don't fuss with their appearance, but have you ever seen color and design quite like theirs? The 10 best-dressed men and women in the country look shabby alongside those flowers. If God gives such attention to the wildflowers, most of them never even seen, don't you think he'll attend to you, take pride in you, do his best for you? What I'm trying to do here is get you to relax, not be so preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way he works fuss over these things, but you know both God and how he works. Steep yourself in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Don't be afraid of missing out. You're my dearest friends. The Father wants to give you the very kingdom itself. Be generous, give to the poor, get yourselves a bank that can't go bankrupt. A bank in heaven, far from bank robbers, safe from embezzlers, a bank you can bank on. It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. So that's the Bible passage for today. Now there's a story at the beginning of our devotion that goes like this. A while ago, a gentleman needed a place to host a small event, and he asked his friends if he could use their vineyard. It was a beautiful small vineyard that was tucked away and peaceful and exactly what he was looking for. Of course, they said. They didn't even pause to think about it. The man was thrilled and surprised at how immediately they answered. And he said, "Are you sure? And how much do you want me to pay? What's your fee?" And they shook their heads and they smiled and they said, "If it's open on our calendar, it's yours." He said, "When we got this place, we got it for everybody. We get to live here, but the land, the view, we got it to share. We want everyone who comes here to feel like it's theirs too, because it really belongs to none of us." So I wonder what motivates some people, like these vineyard owners, to hold their belongings so loosely, to be so giving with their belongings, and others, like the farmer in the story, to cling so tightly, to keep everything to themselves. I wonder if it has to do with where their treasure and their hearts are. National Geographic recently reported that the weight of human production on Earth, that is all the stuff that we make, the sidewalks, the computers, the clothes, the buildings, all of that, equals the mass of all living things on Earth: trees, plants, humans. That is, our junk and our art, our creations, weigh as much as God's creation. If we collected and weighed all the animals on the planet, they would total about 4 billion tons. And that's half of the weight of the plastic that we have produced. So the weight of all the animals on Earth is half of the weight of all the plastic that we've produced. Our stuff weighs as much as the natural world, and nature is abundant. It's everywhere. That's what we hear in this story that Jesus tells. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, his grain, his crops. The man doesn't set out to grow for himself years' worth of grain, but that's what happens. The land has a wonderful yield, and he's surprised by it, and he needs to figure out what to do about it because he has too much. So he builds bigger barns. Have you ever seen a barn? They're pretty big, especially ones that store grain or other crops. I imagine the man standing in front of that newly erected huge facility, stretching higher and wider than the one before, and hauling all his crops inside to lock them up tight because he had to keep them. Chances are when he stepped back, all he could see was the barn. That's what happens when you're next to something so big. It blocks your vision. He probably could not see any of his fields or the hills across the way or his neighbor's land or the creek down at the bottom. He couldn't see any of that. And if that's all he could see were his giant new barns, then the lilies growing down by that creek, the ravens perched in the trees, they're not even in his line of sight. Surrounded by all his stuff, crowded by his need to protect it, he couldn't even see all that God cares for, all that God clothes, all that he feeds, all that he makes beautiful, all those things out, around, and behind the barns. So a new restaurant was opening nearby, and they trained the workers. So that meant that they had to make a whole bunch of food just for training, so there weren't any customers. And they decided to contact the local homeless shelter to see if they could bring the food to them. The shelter director, of course, said, "Yes, please, and thank you." So when they brought the food, the shelter director realized there was more than the people staying at her facility could eat. She called a few other churches in town where people in need sometimes hang out and said, "Could you guys use some burritos? We've got a lot of extra." And the churches, of course, said, "Yes, please, and thank you." The restaurant had options. The employees could have eaten the food. They could have frozen it for a day when they needed some backup supplies. They could have thrown it in the trash so they didn't create a reputation of giving away free food and lose money. They could have just sent it home with the managers. After all, they'll soon want people to come in and pay money for those burritos, so they didn't know if they should give them away. But they did none of that. They had an abundance, and they gave it away. And they gave it to people who probably would never be able to come in that restaurant again, people who were standing on a corner begging for change because they have nothing. And those people probably won't be able to repay the kindness that that restaurant had in sharing their excess food. But that didn't matter, right? Because those restaurant owners were storing up their treasure elsewhere in their hearts. So this weekend, this coming week with spring break in Blair, think about your abundance. Think about your treasures. Think about what God has given you, both in your heart and in front of you and across the way and down by the creek. And just put some extra thought into where your treasure lies. Does it lie in all of your stuff? Or does it lie in God's creation? Does it lie in your heart when you do good and you share? Think about those things this week. I'm not sure what our schedule is going to be like for youth group since it's spring break. I think we will probably not meet this Sunday night, but I am planning to have maybe a late night movie this week sometime. So watch your emails, watch your texts. If you have any questions, or if you ever need anything, if you just need to talk, if you need to shoot some baskets in the youth room, if you need to play some foosball, if you need to go for a walk and you need somebody to listen to you, I am here and I am happy to do any of those things for you. So keep in touch, and I hope to see you very soon. Have a great spring break, and I hope that we'll all be together again very soon. Love you all.